The cold bit through Katherine Sullivan's dress like wolves through thin cloth, and the locked door behind her might as well have been the gates of hell itself for all the mercy it showed. She pounded her fists against the weathered wood one last time, her knuckles already raw and bleeding, but her father's voice came through unchanged, hard as iron and twice as cold. "You made your choice, girl. You defended that half-breed boy against your own brother, and now you can live with the consequences. No daughter of mine takes the side of savages over blood." Katherine pressed her forehead against the door, her breath coming out in white puffs that disappeared into the December darkness of Council Bluffs, Iowa. The year was 1876, and winter had come early and vicious to the Missouri River Valley. Snow fell in thick sheets, already covering her thin shoes and numbing her toes. She wore only the simple cotton dress she had been wearing when her father dragged her home from the general store, not even a shawl to ward off the bitter wind that howled down from the bluffs. "Papa, please," she tried one more time, her voice cracking. "I only told the truth. Jimmy did steal from that boy's family. I could not stand by and watch you all blame an innocent person." The response was the sound of the bolt sliding home with finality. Then her mother's voice, thin and frightened but obedient to her husband. "May God have mercy on your soul, Katherine." The lights in the windows went dark one by one, leaving Katherine standing alone on the porch of the only home she had ever known. At 22 years old, she had always been the stubborn one, the one who spoke her mind when silence would have served her better. Her father had warned her time and again that her tongue would be her ruin, but she had never imagined this. She could not stay on the porch. Already her limbs were growing heavy with cold, and she knew the stories of people who froze to death mere feet from shelter. The Sullivan house sat on the eastern edge of town where the homes gave way to open prairie, and there was no neighbor close enough to beg sanctuary from. Not in this storm and not with the scandal her father would have already begun spreading. By morning, everyone in Council Bluffs would know that Katherine Sullivan had been cast out, and they would know her father's version of why. She stumbled down the porch steps, nearly falling as her numb feet failed to find purchase in the deepening snow. The main street of town lay to the west, but she knew there was no help for her there. The boarding house would turn her away without money. The church was locked at night, and even if she broke a window to get inside, Reverend Morrison would simply return her to her father come morning. That left only one direction to go, though it meant walking into the teeth of the storm. About a mile north, past the last scattered homesteads, there was a ranch she had ridden past countless times. The Hayes Ranch, people called it, run by a man named Dalton Hayes who kept mostly to himself. She knew little about him except that he had fought in the war and come west afterward, that he ran cattle and horses, and that he had a reputation for being fair but hard, the kind of man who did not suffer fools but did not go looking for trouble either. It was a desperate plan, but Katherine had no others. She wrapped her arms around herself and began walking, each step an act of will as the wind tried to push her back toward the locked door and the family that had abandoned her. The snow was already past her ankles, and her dress was soaked through within minutes. She focused on putting one foot in front of the other, not letting herself think about what would happen if Dalton Hayes turned her away too, or if she failed to reach the ranch at all. The world narrowed to the small circle of visibility the storm allowed her. She could barely see 3 feet ahead, and soon she could not feel her hands or feet at all. She was walking on stumps, her body a distant thing that responded sluggishly to her commands. Twice she fell, and the second time it took her long minutes to gather the strength to rise again. The warm darkness beckoned her to simply lie down in the soft snow and rest, just for a moment, but something stubborn in Katherine Sullivan refused to give up. Perhaps it was the same quality that had gotten her cast out in the first place, that inability to surrender even when surrender would be easier. She climbed to her feet once more and continued walking, though she was no longer certain she was heading in the right direction. The storm had erased all landmarks, and she navigated by instinct alone. When the dark shape of a building materialized out of the white chaos, she thought at first it was a hallucination. But as she drew closer, it resolved into a barn, solid and real, and beyond it the outline of a house with lamplight glowing in one window. She had found the Hayes ranch, though whether by luck or providence she could not say. Katherine tried to call out, but her voice emerged as barely a whisper, stolen by the wind. She stumbled toward the house, fell against the porch railing, and somehow pulled herself up the steps. The door seemed impossibly far away, though it was only a few more feet. She crawled the last distance and raised her fist to knock, but the simple act of lifting her arm defeated her. She slumped against the door, and the last thing she remembered before darkness took her was the sound of barking from inside. Dalton Hayes had been reading by lamplight, a rare luxury at the end of a long day when Buck started raising hell. The old cattle dog was not given to barking without cause, so Dalton set down his book and reached for the rifle that hung above the fireplace. Could be wolves, though they usually did not come so close to the house. Could be rustlers, though only a fool would be out in this storm. He crossed to the window and peered out into the storm but saw nothing except the white wall of falling snow. Buck continued barking, now scratching at the door with urgency. Dalton unbolted the lock and pulled the door open, and something heavy fell across the threshold. For a moment, his mind could not make sense of what he was seeing. Then he realized it was a woman, and she was frozen nearly solid. Her lips were blue, her skin white as the snow that covered her, and he could not tell if she was breathing. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, dropping the rifle and crouching beside her. He pressed his fingers to her throat and felt the faintest flutter of a pulse. She was alive, but barely. He did not hesitate. He scooped her up in his arms, surprised by how light she was, and carried her to the fireplace. Buck danced around his feet, whining with concern. Dalton laid her down on the bearskin rug before the fire and quickly assessed the situation. Her clothes were soaked through and frozen in places, and he could see her fingers and toes were white with frostbite. He had seen this before during the war, soldiers who had frozen on winter marches, and he knew what needed to be done. He grabbed every blanket he owned from the chest in the corner and the quilt from his bed. Then he returned to the woman and began the delicate process of removing her frozen clothing. There was no room for modesty here, not when her life hung in the balance. He worked quickly but carefully, peeling away the ice-stiffened fabric. When she was bare, he wrapped her in the layers of blankets and quilts, then lifted her and sat down in his chair by the fire, cradling her against his chest to share his body heat. For the next hour, Dalton held the strange woman and willed her to live. He chafed her hands and feet gently, trying to restore circulation without damaging the frozen tissue. He spoke to her in a low, steady voice, though he did not know if she could hear him. Buck lay down beside the chair, his head on his paws, watching with worried eyes. Gradually, color began to return to her face. Her lips lost some of their blue tinge and her breathing deepened. She began to shiver, violent tremors that shook her entire body, and Dalton knew this was a good sign. The shivering meant her body was trying to warm itself again. As the immediate crisis passed, Dalton finally had a chance to look at the woman he had rescued. She was young, probably in her early 20s, with dark hair that hung in wet tangles around her face. Even half frozen and unconscious, She had a stubborn set to her jaw that suggested strength of character. There was something familiar about her face, and after a moment, he placed her. He had seen her in town a few times, always with an older couple he presumed were her parents. She worked at the general store, or at least he thought she did. He had never spoken to her, but he remembered her because she had smiled at him once, a genuine smile that reached her eyes, when most townspeople regarded him with suspicion or outright hostility. The question of what she was doing out in a blizzard, dressed in nothing but a thin dress and frozen half to death, could wait until she woke. For now, Dalton simply held her and kept her warm, adding logs to the fire to keep the room heated. The storm raged outside, but inside the small house, the light flickered and danced, and slowly, surely, the woman began to thaw. It was near midnight when her eyes finally opened. They were brown, he saw, wide and confused as they struggled to focus. She looked up at him, then down at herself wrapped in blankets, then back at him. He could see her trying to piece together what had happened, where she was, how she had gotten here. "Easy," he said quietly. "You are safe. You collapsed on my doorstep, half frozen. I am Dalton Hayes. This is my ranch." She opened her mouth to speak, but only a small sound emerged. Her throat was too raw from the cold. Dalton reached for the cup of water he had set nearby, anticipating this moment. He helped her sit up enough to take small sips, supporting her with one arm. "Slowly," he cautioned. "Not too much at once." She drank gratefully, then leaned back against him, exhausted by even that small effort. "Thank you," she managed to whisper. "I am Katherine Sullivan." The name meant nothing to him, but he nodded. "What happened, Miss Sullivan? Why were you out in that storm?" He felt her stiffen in his arms, and when she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. "My father locked me out. I had nowhere else to go." Dalton had heard many hard stories in his 30 years of life, but something about the simple horror of that statement struck him deeply. What kind of man locked his daughter out in a killing storm? "Your father did this to you?" he asked, wanting to be certain he understood correctly. Katherine nodded, and he felt a tear slide down her cheek onto his arm. "I defended a Ponca boy against my brother's lies. My father said I chose savages over blood. He said I was no longer his daughter." Her voice broke on the last words. Dalton felt anger kindle in his chest, hot and sharp. He had no use for people who prized their pride over their family, who would rather see someone die than admit they might be wrong. "Then your father is a fool," he said bluntly. "And you are welcome to stay here as long as you need." She turned her face to look up at him, searching his expression as if trying to determine whether he meant it. Whatever she saw there seemed to reassure her, because she relaxed slightly. "I have no money to pay you. I have nothing at all except the dress you." She paused, color rising in her cheeks as she realized what must have happened. "Oh, I apologize for the necessity," Dalton said, keeping his voice matter of fact. "But you would have died if I had left you in those frozen clothes. I did not take any liberties. I was simply trying to keep you alive." "I know," Katherine said quickly. "I mean, I believe you. You saved my life, Mr. Hayes. I am grateful beyond words." "Dalton," he corrected. "If you are going to be staying here, we might as well be on a first-name basis, and you can stay in the loft. It is not much, but it is warm and dry, and you will have privacy." "I cannot impose on you like that," Katherine protested, though her voice was weak. "You are not imposing. This is the frontier, Katherine. People help each other or we all die. It is that simple." He carefully shifted her weight so he could stand, then lifted her again and carried her to the ladder that led to the loft above. "Can you manage the climb, or should I carry you?" She blushed again, but said honestly, "I do not think I can manage it yet. My hands and feet still feel strange." So Dalton climbed the ladder one-handed, bearing her weight with an ease that spoke of years of hard physical labor. The loft was small but tidy, with a narrow bed piled with more blankets and a small chest for storage. He laid her on the bed and pulled the blankets up around her. "Sleep now," he said. "We can talk more in the morning when you are stronger. I will be downstairs if you need anything. Just call out." Katherine caught his hand as he turned to leave, her grip weak but earnest. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "You do not even know me." Dalton looked down at her, this woman who had been thrown away by her own family for the crime of telling the truth. "Maybe I know enough," he said. "Anyone who would stand up for what is right, even when it costs them everything, is someone worth helping. Now rest." He climbed back down the ladder and returned to his chair by the fire. Buck immediately came over and put his head on Dalton's knee, seeking reassurance. Dalton scratched behind the dog's ears absently, his mind turning over the events of the evening. He had been alone on this ranch for 5 years, ever since he had mustered out of the army and used his pay to buy this land. He liked the solitude, the simple rhythm of working with animals and the land, the absence of complications. He had seen enough of the worst of humanity during the war, enough violence and cruelty to last a lifetime. Here, he had peace. And now he had a house guest, a woman fleeing from her own family, with nowhere else to go and no resources to speak of. The smart thing would be to take her into town tomorrow and leave her at the church or the boarding house. Let someone else deal with the problem. But Dalton found he did not want to do that. Perhaps it was because he remembered that smile she had given him in town, the way it had warmed something cold inside him. Perhaps it was because he admired her courage in standing up for what was right. Or perhaps it was simply that he was tired of being alone. Whatever the reason, Dalton knew he would not be sending Katherine Sullivan away, at least not until she was ready to leave of her own accord. The storm blew itself out during the night, and Dalton woke at dawn to brilliant sunshine reflecting off fresh snow that lay 3 feet deep across the landscape. He had fallen asleep in his chair by the fire, and Buck was already waiting by the door to be let out. Dalton rose stiffly, added wood to the coals, and went out to tend to the animals. The barn was warm with the heat of cattle and horses, and the stock had weathered the storm well. Dalton mucked out stalls, distributed hay and grain, and checked each animal carefully for any signs of distress. It was nearly 2 hours before he returned to the house, stomping snow from his boots on the porch. Katherine was awake, he discovered. She had climbed down from the loft and was sitting at his small table, wrapped in one of his blankets. She had found the loaf of bread he had baked 2 days ago and was eating it with what appeared to be great concentration. "Good morning," Dalton said, hanging his coat by the door. "How are you feeling?" "Sore," Katherine admitted, "and my fingers and toes hurt terribly. But I am alive, thanks to you." She looked up at him, and in the morning light he could see her more clearly than he had by lamplight. She had a strong face, pretty in an unconventional way, with intelligent eyes and a generous mouth. There were shadows under those eyes that spoke of a sleepless night. "I have been thinking about what I should do. I cannot stay here indefinitely. It would not be proper, and besides, you did not ask for a permanent house guest." Dalton crossed to the stove and began making coffee, thinking about his response. "What will you do if you leave?" he asked. "Go back to your family." "I cannot," Katherine said quietly. "Even if they would take me back, which I doubt, I could not live with the shame of it. To be taken back like a prodigal child, to spend the rest of my life under my father's thumb, never allowed to speak my mind or stand up for what is right. It would be a slow death." "Then where will you go?" She was silent for a long moment. "I do not know," she finally admitted. "I have a little money saved, but it is in my room at my parents' house, and I cannot go back there to get it. Without funds, I cannot travel to another town. I suppose I could try to find work here in Council Bluffs, but—" She trailed off, but Dalton could fill in the rest. If her father had turned her out publicly, no respectable business in town would hire her. She would be marked as a disobedient daughter, a troublemaker. "You could stay here," Dalton said. "I need help around the ranch. I could pay you wages, and you could save up money until you figure out what you want to do next." Katherine stared at him. "But that would be— people would talk. People always talk." Dalton poured 2 cups of coffee and brought them to the table, sitting down across from her. "Katherine, I am not a fancy man with fancy concerns about reputation. I live out here because I like the quiet, and I do not much care what the town thinks of me. If you are worried about your virtue, I give you my word as a gentleman that you will be safe here. You will have the loft to yourself, and I will not bother you. But if you are worried about gossip, well, there is nothing I can do about that. Folks will believe what they want to believe." "Why would you do this for me?" Katherine asked, echoing her question from the night before. "You could hire any ranch hand. Why take in a woman with scandal following her?" Dalton took a sip of his coffee, considering how to answer. "During the war," he said slowly, "I saw a lot of good people suffer because of other people's cruelty and stupidity. I made myself a promise that if I survived, I would try to be different, try to help when I could. You need help and I can give it. It is that simple." It was not quite the whole truth. There was something about Katherine that drew him, something beyond simple compassion for a person in need. But he was not ready to examine that feeling too closely, not yet. Katherine wrapped her hands around the warm coffee cup, her expression thoughtful. "What kind of work would I do?" she asked. "Cooking, mending, keeping the house. I can teach you to milk the cow and tend the chickens. Later, if you want, you could learn to work with the horses. I have 3 mares I am training to sell, and they need gentle handling." "I can cook and mend already," Katherine said. "My mother made sure I learned all the proper domestic skills, even if she did not succeed in teaching me to hold my tongue." There was a trace of bitterness in her voice. "As for the rest, I would be willing to learn. Then we have an arrangement." Dalton extended his hand across the table. Katherine looked at his hand, then at his face, searching for any sign of ulterior motive. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her, because she reached out and shook his hand firmly. "We have an arrangement, but I want you to know, Dalton Hayes, that I will work hard to earn my keep. I will not be a burden to you." "I never thought you would be," Dalton said truthfully. Over the next few days, they settled into a routine. Katherine proved to be as good as her word about pulling her weight. She took over the cooking, and Dalton discovered that she was far more skilled in the kitchen than he had ever been. She baked bread that was actually soft instead of rock hard, made stews that had flavor beyond simple salt, and even managed to make his meager supplies stretch further than he would have thought possible. She mended his shirts, which had been held together by increasingly desperate stitching, and cleaned the house until it gleamed. In the evenings, she would sit by the fire and work on a quilt using scraps of fabric she found in the chest in the loft. Fabric left behind by whoever had lived in the house before Dalton bought it. Dalton, for his part, went about his usual work, but found himself looking forward to coming back to the house in a way he never had before. It was pleasant to return to a warm meal and a clean home, but it was more than that. Katherine was good company. She was well-read and intelligent, with opinions on everything from politics to farming techniques. They would sit up late into the evening, talking about books they had read or debating the future of the country. She had a quick wit and was not afraid to challenge him when she disagreed, which he found refreshing. Buck adored her, which Dalton took as a sign of good character. The old dog followed Katherine around the house and lay at her feet while she worked. More than once, Dalton caught her slipping buck scraps from the table when she thought he was not looking. On the fourth day, Dalton took Katherine out to the barn to meet the horses. She was still moving carefully, her frostbitten fingers and toes healing but still tender, but she was determined to learn. "This is Rosie," Dalton said, introducing her to a bay mare with a white blaze. "She is the gentlest of the three. Come here and let her smell your hand." Katherine approached slowly, extending her hand as Dalton had instructed. Rosie whuffed softly and nuzzled her palm, and Katherine's face lit up with delight. "She is beautiful," she breathed. "She will be a good horse for some family," Dalton said. "Smart and willing, not easily spooked. I have been training her to pull a wagon as well as carry a rider." He showed Katherine how to brush the mare, how to pick out her hooves, how to check for injuries or illness. Katherine absorbed it all with an intensity that reminded him of himself when he was younger, learning everything he could about horses from an old cavalry sergeant. "You have a way with them," he observed as Katherine successfully got Rosie to lift her hoof on command. "I always wanted to learn," Katherine said, running her hand down the mare's neck. "But my father said it was not proper for a lady. He said I should focus on accomplishments that would help me catch a husband, needlework and painting and such." She made a face. "I am terrible at painting." Dalton laughed, a rusty sound that surprised him. He had not laughed much in recent years. "Well, here you can learn whatever you want. No one to tell you what is proper except yourself." Katherine looked at him, and something in her expression made his breath catch. "You are a good man, Dalton Hayes," she said softly. "Better than you give yourself credit for, I think." He cleared his throat, suddenly feeling awkward under her direct gaze. "Come on, let me show you how to measure out the grain." That night, as Dalton lay in his bed by the fire and listened to Katherine moving around in the loft above, he admitted to himself what he had been trying to ignore. He was falling for her. It was not just that she was pretty or that she worked hard. It was the way she faced adversity with courage, the way she stood up for what was right even when it cost her dearly, the way she laughed at his poor attempts at humor and challenged him to think differently about things he had always taken for granted. But he could not act on these feelings. Katherine was vulnerable, dependent on his charity. It would be wrong to press any kind of romantic attention on her when she had nowhere else to go. She might feel obligated to reciprocate even if she did not share his feelings, and he could not bear the thought of that. No, better to keep his distance and let her heal. If she decided to stay longer, if she came to care for him on her own, that would be different. But he would not push. 2 weeks after Katherine's arrival, they had their first visitor. Dalton was mending a fence when he saw a rider approaching from town. He recognized the horse before he recognized the rider. It was one of the animals from the livery stable. As the rider drew closer, Dalton saw it was a young man, maybe 18 or 19, with dark hair and the high cheekbones that suggested native heritage mixed with European. "Mr. Hayes," the young man called as he dismounted. "My name is Thomas Walker. I hope I am not intruding." "Depends on what you want," Dalton said, setting down his tools and studying the visitor. The young man had an earnest, open face and nervous energy that suggested he was working up courage to say something difficult. "I heard that Katherine Sullivan is staying with you," Thomas said. "I wanted to check that she is all right. What her father did, turning her out like that, it was wrong, and it was my fault." His hands clenched into fists at his sides. "She was defending me when her father cast her out. I could not live with myself if something had happened to her." So this was the Ponca boy Katherine had defended. Dalton felt some of his wariness ease. "She is fine. She is in the house if you want to see her yourself." Relief flooded Thomas's face. "Thank you." I tried to go to her father's house to explain, to tell him that Katherine was telling the truth about my innocence, but he ran me off with a shotgun. He said terrible things about my mother, about me." The young man's voice shook with anger and hurt. "Katherine stood up for me when her own family would not, and now she has lost everything because of it." "It is not because of you," Dalton said firmly. "It is because of her father's pride and cruelty. Katherine made her own choice to tell the truth. You are not responsible for how her father reacted." They walked together to the house, and Katherine came to the door at the sound of voices. Her face brightened when she saw Thomas. "Tommy, I am so glad you came." "Miss Katherine, I am so sorry," Thomas said immediately. "This is all my fault. If I had not been in the store that day, if your brother had not accused me—" "Stop," Katherine said, holding up a hand. "You have nothing to apologize for. Jimmy stole that money, and I would not stand by and let him blame you for it. I would do the same thing again, Thomas. What happened after was my father's choice, not yours." Thomas looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Katherine's expression stopped him. "I brought you something," he said instead, reaching into his saddlebag. He pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "It is not much, but my mother wanted you to have it." Katherine unwrapped the bundle to find a pair of beautifully beaded moccasins and a warm shawl. Her eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Tommy, please tell your mother thank you. These are beautiful. She said to tell you that anyone who stands up for justice is a friend to our family. And she said if you ever need anything, anything at all, you come to us." Thomas paused, then added, "She also said to tell you that Mr. Hayes is a good man, and you are safe with him. She knows him from when he sold horses to my uncle." Dalton felt his face warm at the unexpected praise. He had dealt fairly with the Ponca people when they needed horses, nothing more. He had not expected to be remembered for it. "Would you like to stay for supper?" Katherine asked. "It is the least I can offer in thanks for these gifts." Thomas stayed, and over the meal, Dalton learned more about the situation that had led to Katherine's exile. Her younger brother Jimmy, barely 17 and wild with it, had stolen money from the general store where Katherine worked. When the theft was discovered, Jimmy had blamed Thomas, who had been in the store that day selling furs with his mother. Katherine had witnessed the theft and knew her brother was lying, but when she spoke up, her father had called her a liar and worse. The confrontation had escalated until her father had physically dragged her home and locked her out as punishment. "Jimmy is staying silent," Thomas said bitterly. "He is letting everyone believe I am the thief, and his father is supporting the lie. My mother and I cannot go into town anymore without people treating us like criminals." "The truth will come out eventually," Katherine said. "Lies always catch up to the liar in the end." "I hope you are right," Thomas said, but he sounded doubtful. After Thomas left, Katherine was quiet, staring into the fire with a troubled expression. Dalton wanted to ask what she was thinking but held back, sensing she needed space. Finally, she spoke without prompting. "You think I did the right thing?" she asked. "Standing up for Thomas cost me my family, my home, my reputation. Sometimes I wonder if I should have just kept quiet." "Do you really believe that?" Dalton asked. Katherine was silent for a long moment. "No," she finally said. "No, I do not. If I had stayed silent, I could not have lived with myself. But it is hard, Dalton. I miss my mother. I even miss my father, though he does not deserve it, and I hate that Jimmy is getting away with his lies." "The truth has a way of surfacing," Dalton said. "Your brother is young and foolish. He will make a mistake, and when he does, people will remember that you tried to tell them the truth." "Maybe," Katherine said. She looked at him, firelight dancing in her eyes. "Thank you for letting Thomas visit. I know it might bring trouble to your door." "I am not afraid of trouble," Dalton said. "And anyone who does not like me helping a friend of yours can go to hell." Katherine smiled, a real smile that lit up her whole face. "You keep surprising me, Dalton Hayes." "Good," he said, smiling back. "I would hate to be predictable." As winter deepened, Dalton and Katherine fell into an easy partnership. She proved to have a natural way with the horses, and soon she was helping him with the training. She was patient and gentle but firm when needed, and the animals responded well to her. Rosie, in particular, seemed to have adopted Katherine as her special person, nickering whenever Katherine came into the barn. They worked side by side during the short winter days, their breath misting in the cold air as they went about the endless tasks of ranch life. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, and Katherine would read aloud from Dalton's small collection of books while he worked on repairing tack or carving new axe handles. Sometimes they would simply talk, sharing stories from their pasts. Dalton learned that Katherine had lost 2 younger siblings to fever when she was 12, and that the grief had nearly destroyed her family. He learned that she loved thunderstorms and hated peas, that she had always dreamed of traveling to San Francisco to see the ocean, that she could speak a little French because a traveling teacher had stayed in Council Bluffs one summer when she was young. In turn, he told her about the war, though he kept the worst of it to himself. He told her about growing up on a farm in Ohio, about losing his parents to cholera, about deciding to come west after the war because there was nothing left for him in the East. He told her about the first time he successfully trained a horse, the pride he had felt in earning an animal's trust. "You have a gift for it," Katherine said one evening as they watched the sunset paint the snow-covered prairie in shades of pink and gold. "The horses, I mean. They trust you." "It is about understanding what they need," Dalton said. "Horses are not so different from people in that way. They need consistency, fairness, and patience. Treat them well and they will give you everything they have." "Is that how you see me?" Katherine asked, a teasing note in her voice. "Like a horse that needs training," Dalton felt his face heat. "That is not what I meant at all," Katherine laughed, the sound like bells in the cold air. "I know, I am teasing you, but truly, Dalton, you have been so patient with me. Teaching me about the ranch, giving me space to figure out what I want from my life. Not many men would do that." "Maybe I am just selfishly keeping a good cook around," Dalton said, trying to lighten the moment even as his heart hammered in his chest. "Maybe," Katherine agreed, but her eyes said she did not believe it. Christmas came and went quietly. Dalton had never made much of holidays, but Katherine insisted they mark the occasion. She made a special dinner using some of the precious sugar and dried fruit Dalton had stored away, and she fashioned a small wreath from pine boughs to hang on the door. On Christmas morning, Dalton found a new shirt laid out for him, sewn from fabric Katherine must have somehow acquired and stitched in secret. It fit perfectly and was far nicer than anything he had owned in years. "You did not have to do this," he said, running his hand over the fine stitching. "I wanted to," Katherine said. "You gave me my life back, Dalton. A shirt seems like poor repayment." "It is not," Dalton said. He had a gift for her too, though he had worried it was too forward. But seeing how pleased she was with the shirt, he went to the chest by his bed and pulled out a small package. "For you." Katherine unwrapped it to find a pair of leather gloves, sized for her smaller hands and lined with rabbit fur to keep her warm. She pulled them on and flexed her fingers, her face glowing with pleasure. "They are perfect, thank you, Dalton." On impulse, she stood on her toes and kissed his cheek. It was a brief, chaste kiss, the kind you might give a brother or a dear friend. But it set Dalton's skin on fire, and he had to work to keep his expression neutral. If Katherine noticed his reaction, she did not show it. She simply smiled and went back to preparing their Christmas dinner, humming softly to herself. January brought a false spring, a week of warmer weather that melted much of the snow and turned the paths to mud. Dalton took advantage of the break to ride into town for supplies, something he had been putting off. Katherine asked to come with him, but he gently discouraged it. "Your father might be there," he said, "or your brother. It could be uncomfortable." "I cannot hide forever," Katherine argued. "This is my town too. I did nothing wrong." "I know that and you know that, but people talk, Katherine. They might say things that hurt." In the end, Katherine agreed to stay at the ranch, though Dalton could tell she was not happy about it. He made the ride to Council Bluffs alone, with a list of supplies Katherine had written out in her neat handwriting. Town was busier than usual, people taking advantage of the break in the weather to conduct business and socialize. Dalton hitched his horse outside the general store and went inside, bracing himself for the potential of awkward encounters. The store was run by a man named Silas Greenwood, a portly fellow with shrewd eyes who knew everyone's business. He looked up as Dalton entered and nodded a greeting. "Hayes, been a while since you came to town." "Been busy," Dalton said shortly. He handed over Katherine's list. "I need these supplies." Silas looked over the list and his eyebrows rose. "This is a lot of food for one man, and some of these items, like the sewing needles and the woman's hair combs, seem peculiar for a bachelor household." "Is there a problem?" Dalton asked, his voice carefully neutral. "No problem at all," Silas said, but his expression was knowing. "Just making an observation. I will get these items together for you. It will take a few minutes." While Dalton waited, he became aware of voices in the back of the store, growing louder. One of them sounded angry, and Dalton recognized it as belonging to Peter Sullivan, Katherine's father. "I do not care what it costs," Sullivan was saying. "I want to put up signs offering a reward for information about my daughter. She has been missing for weeks now, and for all I know, she is dead in a ditch somewhere." Dalton felt his hands clench into fists. The man had thrown Katherine out to freeze to death, and now he was pretending to be a concerned father. Before he could think better of it, Dalton strode to the back of the store. Peter Sullivan was there, along with his wife and son. Mrs. Sullivan looked thin and worn, her eyes red from crying. Jimmy Sullivan slouched against a wall, looking bored. Peter Sullivan was a big man, gone to fat but still imposing, with graying hair and a face set in permanent lines of disapproval. "Your daughter is not dead," Dalton said flatly. All three Sullivans turned to stare at him. Peter's eyes narrowed. "Hayes, what do you know about Katherine?" "She is staying at my ranch, has been since the night you locked her out in a blizzard and left her to die." The color drained from Mrs. Sullivan's face. "She is alive." "Oh, thank God, I have been so worried." "Quiet, woman," Peter snapped. Then, to Dalton, "You have no right to harbor my daughter. She is disobedient and willful, and she needs to come home so we can correct her behavior." "She is 22 years old," Dalton said, fighting to keep his voice level. "She is a grown woman and she can make her own choices. She does not want to come back here, and I do not blame her." "How dare you?" Peter said, his face reddening. "You have no idea what that girl put us through. She lied about her own brother, defended a thieving Indian, and brought shame on our family name." "She told the truth," Dalton corrected, "and your son is the liar." Jimmy pushed away from the wall, his expression ugly. "You calling me a liar, Hayes, if the shoe fits." Jimmy took a step forward and Dalton braced himself for a fight, but Peter put a hand on his son's arm, holding him back. "This is not over, Hayes. Katherine is my daughter, and she belongs at home. I will not have her living in sin with some washed-up soldier who thinks he can defy me." "She is not living in sin," Dalton said coldly. "She is working for me as a housekeeper and earning an honest wage." "But even if it were otherwise, it would be none of your concern. You gave up your right to have any say in her life when you threw her out." "I will go to the sheriff," Peter threatened. "I will have you arrested for kidnapping." "Go ahead," Dalton said. "Katherine will tell anyone who asks that she is staying of her own free will. You have no case, and you know it. All you will do is make yourself look like a bigger fool than you already are." He turned and walked back to the front of the store, his heart pounding with anger and adrenaline. Silas had finished packing his supplies, and his expression suggested he had heard every word of the confrontation. "That will be $8.50, Silas said quietly. Dalton paid and gathered his packages. As he was leaving, he heard Mrs. Sullivan's voice, high and desperate. "Peter, please. If she is safe, can we not just let her be? I just want to know she is all right." He did not hear Peter Sullivan's response, but he could guess. Men like that did not give up control easily. When Dalton returned to the ranch, Katherine took one look at his face and knew something had happened. "What is it?" she asked, setting down the shirt she was mending. He told her about the encounter in the store, watching her expression shift from concern to anger to something like grief. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "My mother asked about me," she finally said. "It was not a question. She seemed genuinely worried. She has been crying. She loves me, I think, in her way, but she will always choose my father over me. That is how it has always been." Katherine's voice was flat, empty of emotion. "Thank you for standing up to them. You did not have to do that." "Yes, I did," Dalton said. "Your father is a bully, and bullies need to be stood up to. He might cause trouble for you. Let him try." Katherine smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. "You are a good man, Dalton Hayes, but I am starting to think I bring more trouble than I am worth." "That is not true." The words came out more forcefully than Dalton intended. Katherine looked up at him, surprised, and he took a breath, trying to moderate his tone. "You are worth any amount of trouble. You work hard, you are good company, and you have made this place feel like a home instead of just a house. I do not regret helping you, Katherine, not for 1 second." Something shifted in Katherine's expression, a softness coming into her eyes. "I do not regret coming here either," she said quietly. "I have been happier these past weeks than I have been in years. That probably makes me a terrible person, being happy when I have lost my family. But it is the truth." "It does not make you terrible," Dalton said. "It makes you human. You are allowed to be happy, Katherine. You are allowed to build a new life." "With you?" The question was so soft he almost missed it. Dalton's breath caught. "If you want," he managed. "I think I do," Katherine said. She stood and crossed the room to where he stood by the door, still holding the packages from town. She looked up at him, and there was something in her eyes that made his heart race. "I have been trying to figure out what I am feeling. I thought maybe it was just gratitude or loneliness or the fact that you saved my life. But it is more than that, Dalton. When I think about leaving here, about moving on to somewhere else, I cannot imagine it. Not because I have nowhere to go, but because I do not want to go. I want to stay here." "With you, Katherine," Dalton said, his voice rough. He set down the packages and reached up to cup her face with one hand, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "I have been falling for you since the night I found you on my doorstep. I have been trying to hold back because I did not want to take advantage, did not want to push you into something you might not want. But if you are saying what I think you are saying—" "I am saying I love you," Katherine said simply. "I love your kindness and your strength. I love the way you treat the horses and the way you stood up to my father. I love the sound of your voice when you read aloud in the evenings and the way you laugh when I tease you. I love you, Dalton Hayes, and I want to build a life with you if you will have me." In answer, Dalton bent his head and kissed her. It was gentle at first, a tentative exploration, but when Katherine's arms came up around his neck and she pressed closer, the kiss deepened. It was sweet and passionate all at once, full of all the feelings they had been holding back for weeks. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dalton rested his forehead against hers. "I love you too," he said. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes. I keep thinking I will wake up and this will all be a dream." "Not a dream," Katherine said, smiling. "Very real. I am here, and I am not going anywhere." They stood there for a long moment, simply holding each other, and Dalton felt a peace settle over him that he had not known since before the war. He had been alone for so long, carrying his ghosts and his memories, keeping the world at arm's length. But Katherine had somehow slipped past his defenses and found her way into his heart, and he could not imagine his life without her now. Over the next weeks, something bloomed between them that was deeper and richer than anything Dalton had experienced before. They were partners in every sense of the word, working together during the day and talking late into the night. The physical distance they had maintained broke down gradually, naturally. They would sit close together by the fire, Katherine leaning against Dalton's shoulder while he read aloud. They would hold hands while walking out to check on the animals. They shared lingering kisses that left them both breathless and wanting more. But Dalton was careful not to push for more than Katherine was ready to give. He knew that for her to truly be comfortable, they needed to make their relationship official. And there was another, more practical consideration. If Peter Sullivan decided to make trouble, it would be harder for him to do so if Katherine was Dalton's wife rather than just his housekeeper. On a crisp February morning, Dalton was working on repairing the barn roof when he heard horses approaching. He climbed down to find the sheriff, a man named Marcus Denning, sitting his horse in the yard. Denning was a fair man, well respected in the county, and Dalton had always gotten along with him. "Morning, Hayes," Denning said, dismounting. "I need to have a word with you." "About Katherine Sullivan," Dalton guessed. "Her father filed a complaint. Says you are holding her against her will, corrupting her morals." Denning looked uncomfortable. "I have got to investigate, you understand. It is my job." "I understand. Katherine is in the house. You can talk to her yourself." They walked together to the house, and Katherine came to the door at the sound of voices. She paled slightly when she saw the sheriff, but she lifted her chin and met his gaze squarely. "Miss Sullivan," Denning said, touching the brim of his hat. "I am sorry to bother you, but your father has made some serious accusations. I need to ask you some questions." "Come in," Katherine said, stepping aside. Inside, Denning refused the offer of coffee and got straight to business. "Miss Sullivan, are you staying here of your own free will?" "Yes, absolutely," Katherine said without hesitation. "Has Mr. Hayes harmed you in any way or forced you to do anything against your will?" "No, Dalton saved my life. He has been nothing but kind and respectful toward me." "Your father says you are living in sin." Katherine's jaw tightened. "I am working as Dalton's housekeeper and earning wages. There is nothing sinful about honest work, Sheriff." Denning nodded slowly. "Your father also says you are not in your right mind, that you have been unduly influenced by Mr. Hayes." "My mind is perfectly sound," Katherine said, anger creeping into her voice. "My father is angry because I will not obey him blindly, because I stood up for the truth even when it was inconvenient for him. He threw me out, Sheriff. He locked me out of the house in the middle of a blizzard. If Dalton had not taken me in, I would have died. My father has no right to question my choices now." Denning sighed and put away his notebook. "I believe you, Miss Sullivan, and for what it is worth, I think your father acted shamefully, but I had to come out here and ask. It is my duty." "I understand," Katherine said, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "There is one more thing," Denning said, looking between Katherine and Dalton. "People are talking. Your father is making sure everyone in town knows his version of events, painting you as a fallen woman and Mr. Hayes as a villain. It is not fair, but it is the reality. You might want to think about how to address that. After the sheriff left, Katherine sank into a chair, looking shaken. He is not going to stop, is he? My father. He will keep causing problems until he either forces me home or ruins both our reputations completely. Dalton knelt in front of her chair, taking her hands in his. Katherine, I have been thinking about this. There is a way to solve the problem if you are willing. What do you mean, marry me? Katherine's eyes widened. Dalton. I know it is fast, he said quickly. I know we have only known each other a couple of months, but Katherine, I love you. I want to build a life with you. And practically speaking, if we are married, your father cannot claim impropriety. He would have no grounds to cause trouble. Is that the only reason you are asking? Katherine asked, her voice small. No, Dalton said firmly. He reached up to cup her face, looking into her eyes. I am asking because I cannot imagine my future without you in it. I am asking because every day I wake up and feel grateful that you are here. I am asking because I want to fall asleep next to you every night and wake up beside you every morning for the rest of my life. The practical reasons are just a bonus. Tears spilled down Katherine's cheeks, but she was smiling. Yes, she said. Yes, I will marry you, Dalton Hayes, not because it is practical, but because I love you with all my heart. Dalton pulled her into his arms and kissed her, tasting the salt of her happy tears. We will go into town tomorrow, he said. Talk to Reverend Morrison about a wedding. We will do it right. They rode into Council Bluffs together the next morning, Katherine sitting in front of Dalton on his horse, his arms around her as he handled the reins. It felt like a declaration, riding into town this way, and Dalton could see people stopping to stare as they passed. Reverend Morrison was a thin, austere man who had always struck Dalton as more interested in judgment than mercy. But he agreed to perform the ceremony, though he insisted on speaking with Katherine alone first. He wants to make sure I am not being forced, Katherine explained when she emerged from the Reverend's study. I assured him I am acting of my own free will. They set the date for 2 weeks hence, which would give Morrison time to read the banns and make sure everything was legal and proper. As they left the church, they nearly ran into Thomas Walker and his mother. Miss Katherine, Thomas said, his face lighting up. Mr. Hayes, it is good to see you both. We have some news, Katherine said, unable to keep the smile off her face. Dalton and I are getting married. Thomas's mother, a quiet woman with kind eyes, embraced Katherine warmly. This is wonderful news. You deserve happiness, both of you. You must come to the wedding, Katherine insisted. Please, you are my friends and I want you there. Thomas looked uncertain. Are you sure? Your family will be there, won't they? And they do not exactly welcome our presence. My family will not be there, Katherine said firmly, but you will be if you are willing. Thomas and his mother exchanged glances, then nodded. We would be honored, Thomas's mother said. The news of the impending wedding spread through town like wildfire. Some people were happy for them, but others were scandalized. Katherine Sullivan, marrying a man she had been living with unmarried for weeks. It confirmed all the worst gossip. Peter Sullivan was predictably furious. He showed up at the ranch 3 days before the wedding, red-faced and blustering. Dalton met him in the yard, rifle in hand though not pointed at anyone. You cannot marry her, Sullivan said without preamble. I am her father and I do not give my consent. She is 22 years old, Dalton said calmly. She does not need your consent. The Reverend has agreed to perform the ceremony and it will happen with or without your blessing. I will contest it. I will have it annulled. On what grounds? Katherine is of legal age, of sound mind, and acting of her own free will. You have no case. Sullivan's face twisted with rage and something else, something that might have been pain. She is my daughter, he said, his voice breaking slightly. She belongs with her family." "Then maybe you should have thought of that before you threw her out to die," Dalton said flatly. "You made your choice, Sullivan. Now live with it." "I was teaching her a lesson. I thought she would come crawling back, begging forgiveness. I never thought." He trailed off, seeming to realize he was revealing more than he intended. "You thought you could break her spirit," Dalton said. "You were wrong. Katherine is stronger than you ever gave her credit for, and she is going to be my wife whether you like it or not. Now get off my land." Sullivan left, but not before promising that Dalton would regret this. Dalton watched him ride away and felt Katherine come up beside him. She had been watching from the window. "He is hurt," she said quietly. "Underneath all the anger, he is hurt that I chose you over him. Do you regret it?" "No, but it still makes me sad. He is my father, and part of me will always love him, even though he does not deserve it." She leaned against Dalton's side, and he put his arm around her. "But I am making the right choice. I know I am." The wedding took place on a cold but clear March morning. Reverend Morrison performed the ceremony in the small church, with Thomas Walker and his mother as witnesses. Katherine wore a simple dress she had sewn herself from fabric Dalton had bought in town, and she had woven wildflowers into her hair. Dalton wore his best shirt and pants, and he could not stop staring at her as she walked down the aisle toward him. The ceremony was short and simple. They exchanged vows, their voices steady and sure, and Dalton slipped a plain gold band onto Katherine's finger. He had bought it from the jeweler in town, using most of his savings, but it was worth it to see the joy in her eyes. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Morrison intoned. "You may kiss your bride." Dalton did, thoroughly, and was rewarded by Katherine's laughter when they finally broke apart. They signed the marriage register, and then they were riding back to the ranch as man and wife, Thomas and his mother following to share a celebratory meal. That night, after their guests had left and they were finally alone, Dalton carried Katherine up the ladder to the loft that was now their shared bedroom. He had spent the previous day making it as comfortable as possible, bringing up extra quilts and pillows, placing candles around to give soft light. "It is perfect," Katherine breathed, looking around. "You are perfect," Dalton corrected, setting her gently on the bed. He sat beside her and took her hand. "Katherine, I want you to know that we do not have to. If you are not ready, we can wait. I am not going to rush you into anything." Katherine smiled and reached up to cup his face. "I am ready," she said softly. "I love you and I want to be your wife in every way." Their lovemaking was tender and slow, full of whispered endearments and gentle touches. Afterward, they lay tangled together under the quilts, Katherine's head on Dalton's chest, his fingers running through her hair. "Are you happy?" Dalton asked. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Katherine said. "I feel like I have been waiting my whole life for this for you." "Me too," Dalton said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Me too." Spring came to Council Bluffs with a rush of green and birdsong. The prairie transformed from brown to brilliant emerald, dotted with wildflowers in every color imaginable. Katherine threw herself into ranch life with enthusiasm, working alongside Dalton from dawn to dusk. She learned to train the horses with a skill that amazed him, and when they sold Rosie to a family moving west, Katherine cried but was also proud of how well the mare had learned. They fell into the rhythms of married life with surprising ease. Katherine discovered that Dalton snored when he was particularly tired, and Dalton learned that Katherine was not a morning person and needed coffee before she could form coherent sentences. They had their first argument over whether to plant corn or wheat in the small field behind the house, and their first makeup was sweet enough to make the argument worthwhile. In May, Katherine began feeling unwell in the mornings. At first, she thought she had caught a stomach ailment, But when the sickness persisted for 2 weeks, she began to suspect something else. She was simultaneously terrified and thrilled, and she decided to wait to tell Dalton until she was certain. She confided in Thomas's mother, who came to visit one afternoon with a basket of herbs. The older woman smiled knowingly when Katherine described her symptoms. "You are with child," she said gently. "The signs are clear. Congratulations, Katherine." Katherine pressed her hands to her still flat stomach, tears of joy pricking her eyes. "I am going to be a mother," she whispered. That evening she waited until after supper to tell Dalton. He was sitting in his chair by the fire, reading, when she came to stand in front of him. "Dalton, I have something to tell you." He looked up, immediately alert to the serious tone in her voice. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am fine. Better than fine, actually." She took his hands and placed them on her stomach. "We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Dalton just stared at her, processing the words. Then his face broke into the biggest smile she had ever seen on him. "A baby? Really? Really? In the late fall, probably November." Dalton stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to stop. He set her down and kissed her deeply, then knelt and pressed a kiss to her stomach. "Hello, little one," he said softly. "I am your papa and I already love you so much." Katherine stroked his hair, her heart so full she thought it might burst. This was happiness, she thought. This simple moment, this man, this life they were building together. She had lost her birth family, but she was creating a new one, and it was more precious to her than anything she had left behind. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Katherine found the summer heat exhausting. Dalton fussed over her constantly, insisting she rest more and work less. She complained that he was being overprotective, but secretly she loved his attentiveness. In July, they had an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Sullivan appeared at the ranch one afternoon while Dalton was out mending fences. She arrived in a hired wagon, looking thin and nervous. "Katherine," she said when Katherine came to the door, "please, I just want to talk." Katherine hesitated, but in the end she could not turn her mother away. She invited her in and made tea, and they sat at the table, an awkward silence stretching between them. "I am sorry, Mrs. Sullivan finally said. "For everything. For not standing up to your father, for letting him throw you out, for not coming to find you sooner. I have been a coward and a terrible mother." "Why are you here now?" Katherine asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Because I heard you got married." "And because I heard." She paused, her eyes dropping to Katherine's stomach where a small bump was just beginning to show. "Is it true? Are you expecting?" "Yes," Katherine said. She did not offer more information. Mrs. Sullivan's eyes filled with tears. "I am going to be a grandmother, and I almost missed it entirely because of my husband's pride and my own weakness." She reached across the table, but Katherine did not take her hand. "Please, Katherine, I know I do not deserve it, but can you forgive me? Can we start over?" Katherine wanted to say no. She wanted to send her mother away and show her the same lack of mercy she had been shown. But as she looked at her mother's tear-stained face, she thought about the baby growing inside her, about the family she was creating. Did she want to perpetuate the cycle of pain and rejection, or did she want to break it? "I cannot forgive you yet," Katherine said honestly. "What you and Papa did hurt me too much, but I am willing to try to rebuild our relationship slowly. If you can accept that I am married to Dalton and that we are building a life here, if you can accept that I will not be coming back home or reconciling with Papa." "I accept it," Mrs. Sullivan said quickly. "Your father, he is still angry. But I am done letting him control my life and my relationships with my children. I want to know my grandchild, Katherine. I want to be part of your life again if you will let me." It was not a perfect reconciliation. There was too much hurt for that, but it was a start. Mrs. Sullivan began visiting once a week, always when Peter Sullivan was occupied elsewhere. She helped Katherine sew baby clothes and prepare the loft for the coming infant. She never spoke against her husband, but she no longer defended him either. Dalton was wary of Mrs. Sullivan at first, but he gradually warmed to her when he saw how much the relationship meant to Katherine. He even built an extra chair for the house so Mrs. Sullivan would have somewhere comfortable to sit during her visits. In October, the first snow fell and Katherine felt the first contractions. The baby was coming early, but not dangerously so. Dalton rode to town to fetch the midwife while Mrs. Sullivan stayed with Katherine, helping her through the increasingly painful contractions. The labor was long and hard, lasting through the night and into the next day. Katherine thought she might die from the pain, but Mrs. Sullivan and the midwife coached her through it, and Dalton held her hand and let her squeeze until his fingers were numb. Finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, Katherine gave one last push and felt the baby slip free. The midwife caught the infant and held it up, a squalling, red-faced bundle of fury. "It is a boy," the midwife announced. "A healthy baby boy." Dalton laughed, the sound edged with exhaustion and relief. "A son. We have a son." They named him David Hayes, and he was the most beautiful thing Katherine had ever seen. He had Dalton's dark hair and Katherine's brown eyes, and he had a pair of lungs that could wake the dead. In those first weeks, Katherine thought she might die from exhaustion. But every time she looked at David's tiny face, she felt her heart swell with love. Dalton was a natural father, patient and gentle. He would walk David around the house in the middle of the night, singing old war songs in a soft voice to soothe him. He built a cradle that rocked smoothly and carved small wooden toys for when the baby was old enough to play. Mrs. Sullivan came to visit more frequently now, doting on her grandson. She never mentioned Peter Sullivan, and Katherine did not ask. That part of her life was closed, and she was at peace with it. As David grew from an infant into a toddler, Katherine and Dalton's ranch prospered. They expanded the herd, added more horses to train, and even hired a young man to help with the heavier work. Katherine had discovered she had a gift for breeding horses, matching mares and stallions to produce offspring with the best qualities of both parents. People came from miles around to buy Hayes horses, which were known for their intelligence and steady temperaments. When David was 3, Katherine became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and in the early spring, she gave birth to a daughter they named Dorothy. She was a calm baby, so different from her loud, energetic brother. She had Katherine's dark hair and Dalton's gray eyes, and she seemed to study the world with a serious expression that made everyone who met her smile. The years passed in a blur of hard work and simple joys. David grew tall and strong, following his father around the ranch and learning everything he could about horses and cattle. Dorothy was quieter but no less determined, and she showed an early aptitude for reading and learning that reminded Katherine of herself. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Dalton took Katherine into town to see a traveling photographer who had set up shop for a few days. They had a portrait made, the 4 of them dressed in their best clothes, standing stiff and formal as the camera captured their image. But Katherine treasured that photograph, because when she looked at it, she saw everything she had built from nothing. One day in late summer, when Katherine was 35 and Dalton was 43, they were sitting on the porch watching the children play in the yard. David, now 12, was teaching Dorothy, 9, how to throw a lasso. Dorothy was getting frustrated because she could not quite get the motion right, and David was trying to be patient but not entirely succeeding. "They are good kids," Dalton said, reaching over to take Katherine's hand. "They are," Katherine agreed. "You are a good father." I learned from the best mother I know. Katherine smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder. Did you ever imagine we would end up here? She asked. That night I showed up frozen on your doorstep. Did you have any idea what would happen? Not a clue, Dalton admitted. I just knew I could not let you die. Everything after that was a surprise. A good surprise. The best surprise of my life. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children and listening to the sounds of the ranch around them. In the distance, Katherine could see the road that led to town, and she thought about the girl she had been, locked out in the cold by her own family, with nothing but her principles and her stubbornness to keep her alive. That girl had been terrified and heartbroken, but she had also been brave. She had kept walking even when she wanted to lie down in the snow and give up. She had trusted a stranger when she had no reason to trust anyone. And that trust had led her here, to this porch, to this man, to these children, to this life. Katherine had eventually reconciled with her father, though it had taken years and happened only after he suffered a stroke that left him weakened and humbled. He had apologized in his own way, gruffly and without eloquence, but she had accepted it because life was too short to carry grudges forever. He was not a warm grandfather, but he was present, and that was enough. Jimmy, her brother, had eventually confessed to his theft after being caught stealing again. He had served time in jail and emerged chastened, working now as a laborer and trying to rebuild his life. Katherine had forgiven him too, though they would never be close. Thomas Walker had become a successful horse trader, married with children of his own. He and Dalton had gone into business together, and their partnership was profitable and built on mutual respect. Katherine was godmother to Thomas's oldest daughter. As the sun set on another day in Council Bluffs, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Katherine reflected on how strange and wonderful life could be. She had been cast out, rejected by those who should have loved her most. But in that rejection, she had found freedom. Freedom to choose her own path, to build a life based on her own values, to love without compromise. Dalton squeezed her hand, and she looked over at him. His hair was graying now. Lines had formed around his eyes, but to her, he was as handsome as the day she married him. More so, perhaps, because now she knew every facet of him, every strength and weakness, every quirk and quality. "I love you," she said, as she had said 1,000 times before and would say 1,000 times more. "I love you too," Dalton replied, as he always did, with simple sincerity. In the yard, David finally managed to help Dorothy get the lasso motion right, and her whoop of triumph made both parents smile. This was their legacy, Katherine thought, not just the ranch or the horses or the money in the bank. Their real legacy was these children, raised with love and taught to value truth and kindness above all else. Taught that family was not just blood, but choice. That home was not a place, but a feeling. As darkness fell and they called the children inside for supper, Katherine took one last look at the prairie stretching out around their ranch. She had been lost in that wilderness once, frozen and alone with death reaching out for her. But she had survived. She had thrived. And she had built something beautiful from the ashes of her old life. The cowboy had opened his home and his heart, and in doing so, he had saved more than her life. He had given her a future, and she had taken that gift and made it into something beyond what either of them could have imagined. Years continued to pass, and the Hayes Ranch became one of the most successful in the county. David grew into a fine young man and eventually married a school teacher from Iowa City. They built a house on the southern section of the ranch property, close enough to help with the work but far enough to have their own privacy. Dorothy, true to her studious nature, went east to attend a women's college, something that would have been unthinkable for Katherine's generation. She returned with a degree and a husband who was a veterinarian. and together they opened a practice in Council Bluffs that served both the town and the surrounding ranches. Katherine and Dalton became grandparents 4 times over, and the ranch house that had once been so quiet was frequently filled with the laughter and chaos of grandchildren. Dalton built a larger table to accommodate the growing family, and Sunday dinners became a tradition that everyone looked forward to. Mrs. Sullivan lived to meet her great-grandchildren, and she passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78. Peter Sullivan had died 2 years earlier, and whatever anger Katherine had once felt toward him had long since faded into something more like pity. He had been a man ruled by pride and rigidity, and it had cost him years with his daughter and grandchildren. She was grateful that he had softened enough at the end to know his family, but she did not mourn him the way she mourned her mother. On the night of their 25th wedding anniversary, Dalton took Katherine back to the spot where the old house had stood before they built a larger one. The original house was still there, used now as a guest cottage, but it was the porch that Dalton wanted to stand on. "This is where it all started," he said, putting his arm around her waist. "Right here, where I found you frozen and barely alive." "You saved me," Katherine said, leaning into his warmth. "No," Dalton corrected gently. "You saved yourself. You kept walking when anyone else would have given up. You had the courage to trust a stranger. You rebuilt your life from nothing. I just gave you a place to do it." "We saved each other then," Katherine compromised, "because I gave you something too. I gave you a family, a reason to connect with the world again. You told me once that you came west to escape, to be alone. But you were not meant to be alone, Dalton. None of us are." They stood together as the stars came out, the same stars that had looked down on them that desperate winter night 25 years ago. So much had changed, and yet the essential truth remained the same. They loved each other, and that love had been worth every challenge, every hardship, every moment of doubt. As they grew older, Dalton and Katherine gradually stepped back from the day-to-day running of the ranch, leaving more of the work to David and his family. They took up new hobbies in their retirement. Katherine finally learned to paint, discovering that she had a talent for capturing the wild beauty of the prairie. Dalton wrote down his memories of the war and his years building the ranch, creating a record for future generations of Hayes. They traveled too, something they had never had time for when they were younger and building their life. They went to San Francisco, and Katherine finally saw the ocean she had dreamed about as a young woman. They visited Dorothy in Chicago, where she and her husband had moved to open a larger veterinary practice. They even went back east to Ohio, to the place where Dalton had grown up, though there was little left of the farm he remembered. But they always came back to Council Bluffs, to the ranch, to the home they had built together. It was where they belonged, where their roots had grown deep into the Iowa soil. On a warm spring day in 1912, when Katherine was 60 and Dalton was 68, they sat together on the porch of the guest cottage, the place where their story had begun. Dalton's health had been failing, his heart growing weaker with each passing year. Katherine knew their time together was drawing to a close, and the knowledge sat heavy in her chest. "No regrets?" Dalton asked, his voice weaker than it once was but still warm with love. "Not a single one," Katherine said firmly. She took his hand, feeling how thin it had become, the bones prominent under papery skin. "You gave me the best life I could have imagined. You gave me love and partnership and adventure. You gave me children and grandchildren. You gave me everything." "You gave me more," Dalton said. "You gave me a reason to live instead of just existing. You made this place a home. You made me a better man." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the ranch around them. In the distance, they could hear David working with the horses, his voice carrying on the wind. Closer by, one of the grandchildren was playing, singing a nonsense song. "I am not afraid," Dalton said quietly. "When the time comes, I will not be afraid, because I have had a good life, Katherine. A life full of love and purpose. Not everyone can say that." Tears streamed down Katherine's face, but she did not try to stop them. "I am afraid," she admitted. "I am afraid of being without you. I do not know how to do that." "The same way you did everything else," Dalton said. "With courage and grace, you will be fine, my love. You are the strongest person I have ever known." Dalton passed away 2 weeks later, peacefully in his sleep with Katherine holding his hand. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people from all over the county, testament to the respect he had earned over his years in Council Bluffs. He was buried on a small hill overlooking the ranch with a simple stone that read, "Dalton Hayes, 1844–1912. Beloved husband, father, and friend." Katherine grieved deeply, but she did not break. She had promised Dalton she would be strong, and she kept that promise. She continued to live in the guest cottage, painting and writing and spending time with her family. She told her grandchildren and great-grandchildren the story of how she and Dalton had met, how he had saved her life, and she had saved his in return. She lived for another 15 years, dying peacefully at the age of 75, surrounded by family. Her last words were, "Tell Dalton I am coming home." They buried her next to her husband on the hill, and the family placed wildflowers on both graves, the same kind of wildflowers that bloomed across the prairie every spring. The ranch continued to thrive under David's management and eventually passed to his children and their children after them. The story of Katherine and Dalton became part of the family lore, told and retold with each generation. It became a story about courage in the face of adversity, about love that could overcome any obstacle, about building something beautiful from nothing. It became a reminder that home was not where you started, but where you chose to be. That family was not just blood, but the people who stood by you when everyone else walked away. And on winter nights, when the snow fell thick and the wind howled across the prairie, descendants of Katherine and Dalton Hayes would sit by their fires and think about that long-ago night when a desperate woman stumbled through a blizzard and a lonely cowboy opened his door. They would think about how one act of kindness had rippled forward through time, creating families and futures and possibilities that neither Katherine nor Dalton could have imagined in that desperate moment. The ranch stood for over 100 years, finally sold out of the family in the 1970s when the last of the direct descendants moved to the city. But the story lived on, passed down through letters and journals and oral tradition. And sometimes, people said, on cold winter nights, you could see two figures standing on the hill where the old house used to be, holding hands and looking out over the land they had loved. Whether that was true or just a romantic legend, no one could say for certain. But the truth at the heart of the story was undeniable. That Katherine Sullivan and Dalton Hayes had found each other when they both needed saving, and together they had built a love that transcended time and circumstance and death itself. It was a love born of desperation and nurtured through hardship. A love that had weathered scandal and gossip and family rejection. A love that had grown stronger with each passing year, deepening into something that went beyond romance into true partnership. They had been friends and lovers, confidants and co-workers, parents and grandparents together. They had built an empire from nothing, raised a family, and left a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. And it had all started with one simple choice. The choice of a cowboy to open his door on a winter night, to offer shelter to a stranger, to reach out with compassion when it would have been easier to turn away. And the choice of a young woman to keep walking through the storm, to trust in the kindness of a man she did not know, to have the courage to build a new life when her old one had been torn away. Two people, brought together by chance and desperation, who chose to open their hearts to each other. That was the story of Katherine and Dalton Hayes. That was the legacy they left behind. Not just a successful ranch or a large family, but a testament to the power of love and courage and human compassion. A reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives are the doorway to the best ones if we have the strength to keep walking through the storm. And in the end, that was what mattered. Not where they came from or what they had lost, but what they had built together. A home, a family, a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. That was the story of the cowboy who opened his home and his heart to the woman who was locked out in the cold by her kin. And it was a story worth remembering, worth retelling, worth holding close on cold winter nights when the wind howled and the snow fell and the world seemed dark and unforgiving. Because it was a reminder that there was always hope, always the possibility of redemption, always the chance for a new beginning. All you had to do was keep walking, keep believing, and keep your heart open to love when it finally found you.